Would you risk your entire career to expose a fraud, even if it meant losing everything you'd worked for? The air in the conference room was thick, not just with the smell of stale coffee and desperation, but with the kind of electric tension that precedes a lightning strike. I was sitting across from David, my supposed mentor and the man who, just 3 months prior, had shaken my hand and promised me the world. Now he was looking at me with a cold, dead stare, the kind of look you give a problem you've already decided to eliminate. The projector screen behind him glowed with the title of my life's work, Project Chimera, the future of algorithmic trading. Except it wasn't my name under the title. It was his. My hands were clammy, resting on the polished mahogany table. I could feel the pulse throbbing in my neck, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. This wasn't just an idea. It was 3 years of my life coded in Python, refined over countless sleepless nights, and validated by every backtest I'd ever run. It was the key to the senior partner promotion I'd been guaranteed. It was my $500,000 bonus. And David was presenting it as his own, without a single change, a single acknowledgement, a single flicker of shame. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He had even used the same font, the same color scheme, the subtle, almost imperceptible watermark I had designed. It was a perfect copy, a ghost of my effort, and he was wearing it like a tailored suit. I remember thinking, he doesn't even understand the elegance of the code, the sheer mathematical beauty of the kernel. He just sees dollar signs. So, as you can see, gentlemen, David's voice was smooth, a practiced baritone that always sounded more confident than it had any right to be. Chimera represents a paradigm shift, a true leap forward in predictive modeling. It's ready for immediate deployment. He gestured with a hand that wore a heavy gold ring, a ring I'd never seen before, a new symbol of his perceived success. The 3 partners, Mr. Sterling, Miss Chen, and Mr. Hayes, nodded slowly, their faces impassive. They were the gatekeepers, the final judges. They didn't care about the journey, they only cared about the destination, profit. And David was selling them a first-class ticket. I watched their eyes, trying to gauge if any of them saw the lie, if any of them recognized the hollow ring of David's presentation. They didn't. They were too far removed from the code, too focused on the bottom line. They were already calculating their cut of the projected revenue. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat, a dry, bitter lump. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, a calm, rational presentation of the facts. Partners, with all due respect, I designed and coded every line of this project. David was merely the supervising manager. But the reality was a suffocating wave of betrayal. David had systematically isolated me over the last 6 months, moving me off client work, telling me it was to focus on Chimera, but in reality it was to ensure I had no witnesses. He had access to my repository, my notes, my entire life on the company server, and he had used it all to build his golden parachute. The isolation had been a slow, insidious process. First, it was just the client meetings. Thompson, you focus on the code, I'll handle the stakeholders. Then it was the internal progress reports. Just send me the bullet points, I'll synthesize them for the executive summary. By the time I realized what was happening, I was a ghost in my own project, a mere resource David was managing. I felt a cold, hard knot of rage tighten in my chest. I looked at Miss Chen, the only one who had ever shown me a shred of genuine respect. She was a legend in the firm, a former quant who had made partner through sheer, undeniable brilliance. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw a flicker of something. Pity? Recognition? Then it was gone, replaced with the cold, professional mask. She cleared her throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. David, the projections are impressive, but I have a technical question about the dynamic reweighting module. The white paper you submitted mentions a novel application of a Markov chain Monte Carlo method. Can you walk us through the complexity reduction achieved by your custom kernel? Her voice was precise, cutting through the corporate jargon like a laser. David blinked. His smooth facade cracked just for a millisecond. He hadn't anticipated a deep technical dive. He was a manager, a schmoozer, not a coder. He was relying on the buzzwords and the impressive charts I had generated. The question was a trap, and he was walking right into it. The custom kernel was the heart of Chimera, the part that made it a true breakthrough, and it was the part I had spent 6 months optimizing. I knew the answer, the exact mathematical proof, the line of code where the optimization occurred. "Of course, Miss Chen," he stammered, recovering quickly, a sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead. The complexity reduction is significant. It's a proprietary optimization, which I can't detail in full here, but it leverages a novel application of the core principles. He was grasping at straws, using filler words and vague corporate speak. He was drowning, and I was watching him sink. The temptation to throw him a lifeline, to step in and save the project was immense, to protect my work, even if it meant protecting the thief. But the betrayal was a heavier weight, a leaden anchor dragging me down. I thought of the late nights, the sacrifices, the sheer intellectual effort I'd poured into this, and the temptation vanished. Ms. Chen's gaze shifted back to me, a deliberate, pointed move. "Mr. Thompson, you've been the lead developer on this project. Perhaps you can elaborate on the kernel optimization." The room went silent. David's eyes were wide now, a silent, desperate plea. "Don't you dare." His lips formed the word no, but no sound came out. He was trapped, and I held the key. I took a slow, deep breath, the air tasting metallic. This was my moment. This was where I could reclaim my work, my promotion, my life. But I didn't. I looked David straight in the eye. A small, cold smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of absolute, chilling finality. "I'm sorry, Ms. Chen," I said, my voice steady, almost unnervingly calm. "I'm afraid I can't. David has been the sole author and presenter of this work for the last 3 months. Any technical questions should be directed to him." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. "In fact, I haven't had access to the final repository for over a month. David informed me he was handling all final submissions and documentation personally." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the answer they expected. It wasn't the answer David expected. It was a calculated, brutal move. I had just thrown the grenade and pulled the pin. The partners didn't need to be coders to understand the implication. I was being cut out, and David was lying about it. David's face flushed a deep, angry red, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. He knew what I was doing. I was letting him hang himself with his own rope. The partners exchanged glances. They were smart enough to read the subtext. The air of professional presentation had evaporated, replaced with the stench of corporate sabotage. "Mr. Sterling," voice was low, dangerous, a low rumble before the storm. "David?" David scrambled, his voice high-pitched and frantic. "It's a simple misunderstanding, partners. He's been under a lot of stress. He's a brilliant coder, but he's not a presenter. He's just nervous. He's trying to undermine me because he's jealous." "Nervous?" I interjected, my voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. "David, you told me 2 weeks ago that you had submitted the final white paper to the partners. You said you were presenting it as the culmination of our joint effort, and my promotion was a formality. You neglected to mention that you had removed my name from the title page, the abstract, and the entire codebase commit history. I let my gaze sweep across the partners, making sure they saw the sincerity in my eyes. The technical details Ms. Chen asked about, I can explain them in excruciating detail, but I won't, because the moment I do, I validate David's claim that this is his project. It's not. It's mine, and he stole it. I pulled a small laminated printout from my jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was a screenshot of the initial commit log for Project Chimera, showing my name, my timestamp, and the first 10,000 lines of code. It was irrefutable, a digital fingerprint. That, I said, pointing to the screen where David's name still shone, a lie. And this, I tapped the printout, the truth. The meeting ended abruptly. David was escorted out by a security guard, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, sputtering threats and accusations that no one was listening to. I was told to wait. I sat there for 2 hours, the silence of the room amplifying the chaos in my head. I hadn't just exposed David. I had exposed the company's flawed internal controls, the partners' lack of due diligence, and my own willingness to play a dangerous game. I had burned the bridge, and I was standing alone on the wreckage. When Mr. Sterling finally returned, his expression was grim, his face etched with the fatigue of a man who had just had a very expensive problem dropped in his lap. "Thompson, you've done the right thing. David is gone. You'll get your promotion, your bonus, and full credit for Chimera. The firm will issue a statement about a misunderstanding and a personnel change. But you've also created a massive liability for this firm. We can't have this kind of internal warfare. You're too volatile. You're a brilliant mind, but you're a loose cannon." He offered me the world, and then he took it away. I was promoted, paid, and then immediately put on administrative leave. The official reason? Stress-related sabbatical. The real reason? I was a loose cannon who knew too much. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. I was $500,000 richer, but I was unemployed, blacklisted in the industry, and utterly alone. The promotion was a hollow title, the bonus a severance package disguised as a reward. They had bought my silence and my departure in one swift, cynical move. I remember the feeling of the check clearing, the massive number in my bank account, and the profound emptiness that came with it. It was the most expensive silence I had ever bought. That was 6 months ago. I spent the first 3 months in a haze of anger and self-pity, watching my savings dwindle, my reputation in tatters. I tried to find a new job, but the finance world is small, and word travels fast. Thompson? Oh, he's the guy who blew up his own career to take down his boss. Too much drama, too much risk. Every interview ended the same way. A polite smile, a firm handshake, and a promise to call that never materialized. I was radioactive. I started drinking too much coffee, sleeping too little, and staring at the ceiling, replaying the conference room scene over and over, always wondering if I could have played it differently. But the money was still there. The $500,000 bonus sitting in a high-yield savings account mocking me. It was the price of my soul, the consolation prize for a life derailed. I kept looking at it, thinking, what is this money for? It wasn't for a house or a car or a fancy vacation. It was for revenge. Not just against David, who was probably already working at some other unsuspecting firm, but against the system that had allowed him to thrive and me to be discarded. The firm had treated me like a disposable asset, and I decided I would be the most expensive disposable asset they had ever encountered. I started small. I used a fraction of the money to hire a private investigator, a quiet, unassuming woman named Sarah, who specialized in corporate espionage. She had a face that blended into any crowd and a mind like a steel trap. Her office was in a basement, smelling faintly of ozone and old paper, but her reputation was legendary. I didn't want David ruined. I wanted him exposed. I wanted the world to see the rot beneath the polished surface. I wanted the firm to feel the consequences of their cynical decision to protect their image over the truth. Sarah's first report was a goldmine. David hadn't just stolen my work, he had a pattern. 3 previous jobs, 3 suspiciously similar departures, always with a massive project left behind that was quickly credited to his name. But the most damning detail wasn't his professional life, it was his personal one. David was a man obsessed with appearances. He drove a leased Porsche, lived in a rented penthouse, and his entire life was a carefully curated facade of success. He was living on the edge, one missed payment away from collapse. His credit score was a disaster, his personal loans were maxed out, and his wife was threatening divorce. He was a house of cards built on a foundation of debt and lies. And then there was the watch. A vintage Patek Philippe, a family heirloom, he claimed, worth over $150,000. He wore it to every meeting, a subtle flex of old money and success. Sarah found a pawn shop receipt. He had pawned the real one months ago and was wearing a high-quality replica. He was broke. The $500,000 bonus he thought he was getting from Chimera wasn't going to be a bonus, it was going to be a bailout. It was going to be the difference between keeping his life together and watching it all fall apart. The sheer desperation of his situation was almost pathetic, but it didn't temper my resolve. It only sharpened it. This was my opening. I didn't want to just expose his fraud. I wanted to hit him where it hurt the most, his image. I wanted to make his carefully constructed life crumble in a way that was public, humiliating, and irreversible. I wanted him to feel the same sense of powerlessness I had felt in the conference room. I started planning. I called in every favor, every contact, every dark corner of the internet I knew. I needed a team, a ghost crew that could execute a plan that was equal parts technical brilliance and theatrical malice. I found a hacker in Eastern Europe who specialized in deep fakes and digital identity theft, a former journalist who knew how to plant a story, and a social media influencer with a massive, highly engaged following who specialized in exposing corporate hypocrisy. The cost was astronomical. I was spending my entire severance package, the money that was supposed to be my safety net, on a vendetta. The money was burning a hole in my pocket, and I realized it wasn't a safety net, it was ammunition. I felt a strange exhilaration, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since I wrote the first line of Chimera. The first phase was the most crucial, the digital footprint. David was meticulous about his online presence, but he made one fatal mistake. He used the same password for his personal cloud storage as he did for an old, defunct gaming forum from a decade ago. The hacker, who went by the handle Cypher, cracked the forum, found the password, and gained access to David's entire digital life. It was a rookie mistake, a testament to his arrogance and his belief that he was untouchable. What we found was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just financial desperation, it was outright illegal activity. David had been using his position to funnel small, untraceable amounts of company money into a shell corporation he owned, disguised as consulting fees. It was small time, maybe $50,000 over 2 years, but it was enough to be a felony. He was a thief, not just a corporate climber. The documents were damning. Invoices for strategic consulting from a company whose only address was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, signed by David himself. The paper trail was sloppy, almost as if he thought no one would look. I sat in my empty apartment, the glow of my monitor illuminating the horror of the documents. I had gone from seeking revenge for a stolen idea to holding the key to a man's prison sentence. The moral dilemma hit me like a physical blow. Do I really want to ruin this man's life? He ruined mine. He took my future, my reputation, my peace of mind. He deserved to pay. But did he deserve to go to jail? I wrestled with this for days, pacing my apartment, the smell of old pizza and stale air a constant companion.
I wasn't a monster. I was a coder. I believed in logic and justice, not in the destruction of a human life. But then I thought about Mr. Sterling, Miss Chen, and Mr. Hayes. They had let David do it. They had rewarded his fraud and punished my honesty. They were all part of the same corrupt system. Ruining David was just a small victory. I needed to do something bigger, something that would shake the foundation of the firm that had betrayed me. I needed to make them pay for their complicity. I decided to pivot. The illegal activity was my leverage, but the real weapon was the truth about Project Chimera. I realized that David's presentation to the partners had been a lie, but not just because he stole it. The project itself had a flaw, a critical vulnerability I had discovered just days before the presentation, a flaw that would cause a cascading failure when the market moved too quickly. It was a subtle bug in the dynamic reweighting module, the very part Miss Chen had asked about, that caused a cascading failure when the market moved too quickly. I had fixed it in my local branch, but David had presented the flawed, unpatched version. He had been so eager to claim the credit that he hadn't even bothered to check if the code was stable.
This was the key. I didn't need to send David to jail. I needed to let him deploy the flawed project. I needed to let the firm invest millions into a system that was guaranteed to implode. The irony was delicious. My stolen work would be their undoing. The plan shifted from exposure to calculated destruction. I had Cypher create a ghost file on the company server, a seemingly innocuous log file that would be ignored by IT but would act as a backdoor. The goal was simple: wait for Chimera to go live, and then, at the precise moment of peak market volatility, trigger the flaw. The resulting financial loss would be catastrophic, far exceeding the $500,000 bonus I had lost. It would be a billion-dollar mistake. I spent weeks refining the trigger, making sure it was untraceable, a ghost in the machine that would vanish the moment it executed its payload. The code was a thing of dark beauty, a digital time bomb set to detonate at the most financially damaging moment. I felt a cold pride in my technical skill, even as I recognized the moral abyss I was staring into. I contacted my former journalist contact, a woman named Lena, who now ran a successful financial news blog with a reputation for breaking insider stories. She was sharp, cynical, and utterly fearless. I didn't give her the full story, I gave her a tip. Project Chimera at Sterling, Chen, and Hayes is built on a foundation of fraud and is structurally unsound. Watch the market on the third Tuesday of next month. Lena was skeptical, but the name Project Chimera was enough to pique her interest. She knew the firm had been hyping a major algorithmic breakthrough. I sent her a small, encrypted file containing the original, unstolen white paper with my name on it and a detailed but highly technical explanation of the flaw. I told her to sit on it. Publish this the moment the market reacts, I instructed, not a second before. You have to wait for the chaos to start, or they'll just bury the story. She agreed, her voice tight with the thrill of the chase. She was a hunter, and I had just given her the scent of a billion-dollar kill. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and anticipation. I watched the news, I watched the firm's stock price, and I watched David's social media. He was back to posting pictures of his family heirloom watch and his hard-earned success. He was a ghost in the machine, unaware that the machine was about to be dismantled around him. He had been promoted to Director of Quantitative Strategy, the very title I had been promised. The arrogance was palpable, and it fueled my resolve. I felt a strange, detached calm, the kind of peace that comes from knowing the worst is yet to come and you are the one holding the match. The third Tuesday of the month arrived. I was sitting in a dingy coffee shop miles away from the financial district, the smell of burnt espresso and old pastries filling the air. I was watching the market on my laptop, a cheap, anonymous machine I had bought for this purpose. David had been promoted, Chimera was live, and the firm had invested heavily. The market was calm, a slow, steady climb.
too calm. I needed chaos. I needed a black swan event. The tension was unbearable, a physical pressure behind my eyes. I messaged Cypher, initiate phase 2. Cypher's response was a single cryptic emoji, pow. Within minutes, a seemingly unrelated event occurred. A major tech company announced a completely unexpected earnings miss, sending a ripple of panic through the Nasdaq. This was the volatility I needed. The market was suddenly a sea of red, and Project Chimera, the flawed, unpatched version, was designed to panic. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. I watched the trading volume spike. Chimera was supposed to be a stabilizing force, a predictive model that could weather any storm. Instead, it was amplifying the panic. It was selling, then buying, then selling again, creating a feedback loop of chaos. The firm's internal trading desk was in a frenzy. I could almost hear the shouting from the coffee shop. The numbers on my screen were flashing red, a digital hemorrhage. The firm's proprietary trading accounts were hemorrhaging capital at a rate that was almost impossible to comprehend. Millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions vanished in the blink of an eye. The flaw was working exactly as designed, turning a market correction into a full-blown financial catastrophe for Sterling, Chen, and Hayes. Then the first headline dropped on Lena's blog. Hashtag Insider exposes Sterling, Chen, and Hayes' Chimera project as a $1 billion fraud. The article was a masterpiece of controlled fury. It detailed David's theft, my original work, and the critical, unpatched flaw that was now actively destroying the firm's capital. Lena had done her homework. She had cross-referenced my technical explanation with public trading data, and the evidence was irrefutable. The article went viral instantly, picked up by every major financial news outlet. The narrative was simple: corporate greed, stolen IP, and a catastrophic failure of due diligence. The firm's reputation was destroyed in a matter of hours. The market reaction was immediate and brutal. Investors pulled out, the firm's stock plummeted, the SEC launched an immediate investigation. David was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, his phone off, his social media accounts deleted. He was a ghost, but this time it was a ghost of his own making. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my own face, tired, drawn, but with a strange, unsettling sense of peace. I had done it. I had ruined his life, and in the process, I had brought down the system that had protected him. I had lost my career, but I had gained something far more valuable: justice. But as I walked out of the coffee shop, the sun warm on my face, a new thought began to gnaw at me. Was this justice, or was it just another form of corporate greed masked by a righteous cause? I had hurt a lot of innocent people: the junior analysts, the support staff, the investors who had trusted the firm. I had become the very thing I hated: a destroyer. The weight of the destruction was heavy, a cold knot in my stomach. I had sought revenge, and I had achieved it, but the taste was bitter. I had the money, I had the satisfaction, but I didn't have a future. I was a brilliant coder with a reputation for being a corporate terrorist. Who would hire me now? I was unemployable, a pariah. I walked for hours, the city a blur of noise and motion. I ended up at the waterfront, watching the ships come in. The air was cold, the water choppy. I pulled out my phone and looked at the news. David had been arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to a non-extradition country. The firm was in chaos, facing multiple lawsuits and a criminal investigation. Mr. Sterling, Ms. Chen, and Mr. Hayes were all under scrutiny. I had won, but the victory tasted like ash. I had traded my integrity for revenge, and I wasn't sure if the exchange was worth it. I was standing on the edge of a new life, a life without the structure, the ambition, and the clear moral compass I once had. The $500,000 felt like a curse, a constant reminder of the darkness I had embraced. I decided to use the money for good, not as a bribe or a donation, but as a weapon for truth. I started a nonprofit foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers in the financial sector. I used my technical skills to build an encrypted, anonymous platform where employees could report fraud without fear of retaliation. I called it Project Phoenix. It was a way to redeem the chaos I had created, to turn the destruction into construction. It was a slow, painful climb back to the light. I was still an outcast, but now I was an outcast with a purpose. I was using the money David had stolen, the money the firm had paid me to go away, to fight the very system that had created them both. I hired Sarah full-time, and Lena became my chief communications officer. The Ghost Crew became a force for good. We were a small, dedicated team fighting a war against corporate corruption, one anonymous tip at a time. The first successful case came 6 months later. A junior accountant at a major bank used Project Phoenix to expose a massive money laundering scheme. The bank was fined billions, and the accountant, protected by my platform, walked away with a massive reward and a new life. It was a small victory, but it felt like 1,000 times sweeter than the destruction of Sterling, Chen, and Hayes. I was no longer Thompson, the volatile coder. I was the architect of justice, the silent protector of the truth. I lost my career, but I found my calling. The revenge was sweet, but the redemption was sweeter. I had turned a personal tragedy into a public good. I still think about David sometimes. I wonder if he regrets what he did. I wonder if he understands the chain reaction he started. I wonder if he knows that his greed didn't just ruin my life, it created a force that is now actively dismantling the world he tried to climb. I look at the platform now, the thousands of users, the dozens of successful cases. It's a testament to the power of a single stolen idea. David wanted a $500,000 bonus. I gave him a life sentence, and I gave the world a new way to fight back. I lost my career, but I gained a purpose. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Drop a comment with your platform of choice. Like if you learned something new, share this post with friends, and subscribe for more social media comments.